Since my divorce from Kate, 7 years have passed. That pathetic piece of trash is still in town. She got promoted and has been the superintendent of our city's school system for the last 3 years. My youngest daughter, Carla, was starting the second half of her sophomore year in high school. Like her sisters before her, she was an honor student, a 3-time varsity athlete, and actively involved in the school's theater and music departments. Carla is the last daughter left at home. Right now, Kayla is in her sophomore year at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and if she maintains her grades, she'll stay in school and earn a master's degree in mechanical engineering. Kara is a freshman at Boston University, studying finance and accounting. Carla was only 8 years old when I divorced her deceitful, conniving, gonorrhea-infested mother. While her older sisters knew about their mother's betrayal and mostly avoided her, Carla didn't understand all the consequences of Kate's actions. As a result, she had dinner with her mom once or twice a week and often spent the weekends at Kate's house. I was in my office, on the second floor of the old converted barn that I inherited from my grandfather. I felt sick to my stomach as I reviewed the New Year's resolutions I had made just a month ago. 1. Lose 7 kilograms.
I gained 0,5 kilograma.
2. Exercise for 45 minutes a day. I missed 7 days. 3. Give up snacks after dinner. Damn. On average, every evening I snacked on 2 appetizers and beer. 4. Have sex twice a week. On average, I went on 1 date a week. 5. Write 1 short story per month and post them. It was the beginning of February, and I still haven't written a single story. 6. Clean out old files from my filing cabinets. Over the past quarter century in my personal and professional life, I've accumulated enough paperwork to completely fill 23 4-drawer filing cabinets. I rarely went into the filing cabinets. In the last 5 years, almost all of my files have been stored on my computer and in the cloud. I had been considering calling an industrial shredder to the shed and unloading the contents of each drawer of the cabinet into the shredder, but I knew that among this clutter were irreplaceable treasures. I had committed to clearing out 1 drawer a day, but never got around to starting the project. I tossed the list of resolutions onto my desk, grumbling as I got up from my chair and walked to the filing cabinet. I completely pulled out the oldest drawer of documents from the cabinet and placed it on the folding table. Pushing a large trash can next to the table, I began to sift through each folder. I must admit, the project turned out to be much more interesting than I had thought. I found records of the first house I rented out when, as a second grader, I worked for my grandfather. I stumbled upon a folder filled with United States government bonds that my daughter's grandparents had bought for them early in their lives. The filing cabinet held old photographs, early school projects and report cards, original birth and baptism certificates. On the 4th day of the project, my life turned upside down. I found documents about my ex-wife's stay in the hospital when she gave birth to Carla. I smiled as I looked at the expenses listed in the documents, compared to current prices. And then I saw it. In Kate's, my ex's, documents, her blood type was listed as 1+. It was impossible. I also had blood type 1, just like my 2 older daughters. Carla, the youngest, had a much rarer type, for Dash. Over the next few hours, I found 6 separate folders with old medical records confirming our blood types. There were no mistakes. Carla wasn't my biological daughter. After countless hours and several detailed plans for abduction, torture, and sending my ex-wife to an African brothel, into the depths of a cargo ship while the crew constantly subjected her to group rape, I had an epiphany. I realized I couldn't do anything that would jeopardize the precious 2 years I had left with Carla before she left for college. It took over a week before I decided to keep this grotesque family secret to myself. I was sure my ex didn't know that I wasn't Carla's father. If she had known, she would have fought for custody and, most likely, would have gotten all 3 girls. At the very least, I was grateful for being allowed to raise my daughters. The only active step I took was to quietly arrange for an official DNA test. The test confirmed what I already knew. Almost exactly 2 years later, in the week between Christmas and New Year's, I sat at the dining table with my 3 daughters. As always, it was joyful to be surrounded by their teasing, laughter, and banter. I had been preparing all day, and when our meal was finished and the conversation died down, I looked at Kayla and Kara and said, I need to talk to Carla. Will you two clean up after yourselves? Both girls agreed and started teasing their sister, saying she was in trouble and would be punished until the end of the Christmas break. I said to Carla, why don't you come into my office? I want to talk to your sisters. Carla teased her sister, saying, look who's in trouble now. Smiling and waving, she walked out through the back door and headed to my office above the barn. What are your plans for the evening? I asked. Kara replied, we're going to the barn to hang out with our old school friends. I nodded for a few seconds and tried to smile, but emotions began to overwhelm me. Are you okay, Dad? Kayla asked. It took me a moment to collect myself. I asked the girls, would it be all right if you canceled your plans? I have a feeling both of you will be needed by your sister. Is Carla okay? Kylie asked. Is she sick?
Kara inquired.
She's not sick. I have to tell her some very bad news. Actually, it's terrible news. I know she'll need your support. Tell us, Dad.
Kara pleaded.
I contemplated telling the older girls first, but I didn't decide until Kara asked her question. Your sister is already 18. She's legally an adult. I have to tell her first. It won't take long. I'll let you know when I need your help. Leaving the table and the concerned girls behind, I made my way through the backyard to my office. Carla was sitting on the couch at the other end of the room from my desk. Instead of sitting next to her, I sat on the coffee table across from her. We were sitting knee to knee. I asked, do you remember when I cleaned out my old papers from the back filing cabinet? Carla nodded and replied, yes, that was a few years ago. I was very thorough and went through every folder in every drawer. I knew that among the useless papers were important family treasures. Carla continued to nod understandingly. I found something in the papers that I need to talk to you about. It's very important. This information made me physically ill. I'm still devastated. Usually, I try to shield you from such traumas, but you need to know, especially before you leave for college. I want to tell you now while your sisters are home and can support you. I also want you to have time to process the information before leaving for college.
Dad, I'm scared.
Don't be scared. We'll handle this as a family. I handed Carla the folder I brought from the kitchen. When she opened it, I said, these are medical records from when your mom was in the hospital when you were born.
Około.
Carla flipped through the pages in the folder, then came to a page with a big red circle. She read the information in the circle and said, I didn't know Mom had blood type 1-. Carla is a smart girl, and she enjoys all areas of science. I've seen the gears turning in her brain. She flipped through several remaining pages in the folder. There were no additional highlighted sections. Carla took a minute to digest the information in the packet, then looked up at me with questioning eyes. She sniffled and reached out to me, and I jumped onto the couch next to her. I hugged her as she started to cry. Dad, what's your blood type? And I answered, 1. Carla wailed like a wounded animal. She clung to me tightly and sobbed, you're my only dad. And you're my little girl. We hugged each other for a long time. Every few minutes, I heard a ding, indicating I had a message. Pulling back and looking Carla in the eyes, I said to her, your sisters are texting me and want to come over and be with you. Shall I invite them? I barely had time to reach for my phone before Carla asked, do they know? I shook my head and told her, I thought it was important to tell you first, but we should share the information with them. Nodding, Carla allowed me to add her siblings to the list. I grabbed the phone from the table and typed in the messaging app, come over. Carla hugged me and cried on my chest. She cried even harder when we heard the footsteps of her sisters coming up the stairs to my office. The girls trotted through my office, settled on the couch, and we all hugged each other tightly. After a few minutes, Kayla asked, what trouble has our mother caused now? I laughed and replied, how do you know this has to do with your mother? Kara answered, we have our ups and downs, like any normal family, but when everything goes awry, it's always because of Mom. A tiny voice buried deep in my chest agreed when Carla said, she's a bitch. Kayla and Kara were stunned by their sister's comment and equally stunned when I sternly said, "Young lady, we don't use oh, damn it, she's a bitch." Carla giggled, and we loosened our embrace. We resumed our positions. Kara and Kayla nestled next to their younger sister, and I sat on the desk in front of the trio. Carla looked at me and said, "I can't tell them, Dad. Will you?" I began, "I'll always be Carla's dad. No one will ever take away that honor and privilege from me." Kayla and Kara looked bewildered, and I continued, "I recently found out that I'm not her biological father." It took a moment for the information to sink in, and then chaos ensued. Over the next few minutes, there were many tears, hugs, and just as many curses and shouts. When everything quieted down, Kayla asked, "Who's this asshole sperm donor?" "I don't know," I admitted. Kara asked her sister, "Are you going to ask Mom who your father is?" I surprised the group when I told them, "I don't think your mom suspects that I'm not Carla's biological father." They all turned to me, surprised. "Why do you say that?" asked Kara. I explained, "Our divorce was quite contentious. At the same time, because of your mom's position in our town, she had to be careful not to tarnish her reputation. She didn't want everyone to know she was the reason for the divorce. I promised to keep quiet if she allowed me primary custody." All three girls nodded in understanding. "I'll never be 100% sure, but knowing your mom, I think she would have fought for custody if she knew I wasn't Carla's biological father. The court wouldn't have had much choice, and I suspect you would have been given to her. She's dead to me." At Carla's remark, her sisters nodded in agreement. She continued, "I don't want that crap to know about this, at least not until I've come to terms with it." We remained silent, expecting something more. "Someday, I'll make that scum regret the day she was born." Then, looking at me, she concluded, "I hope you won't have to post bail for me." We all chuckled, and I asked, "Can I give you some advice?" "Of course, Dad. I'll support you in whatever you do. But remember, you have to be able to look at yourself in the mirror. Don't stoop to your mother's incredibly low level." The first call from Kate came 3 weeks later. "What the hell is going on with Carla?" She yelled into the receiver. "Carla is fine. She's perfect." "Bullshit. The only time I saw her after Christmas was at my parents' house 2 weeks ago." "So what?" I asked. "She was all sunshine and rainbows for everyone but me. She treated me like crap. She doesn't return my calls and messages. She didn't show up for dinner. Something's off, and I want to know what it is. Will you ask her?"
Irraplia. No.
"I won't ask. She communicates fine with me and her sisters. Her teachers haven't reported anything to me. Coach Amy said Carla is a natural leader and the best captain on the girls' basketball team. It seems like you're the only one having issues with Carla, and I don't want to get involved." I hung up and didn't answer when she called back a minute later. The next few months flew by unnoticed. It was late spring, and basketball games were replaced by lacrosse. I sometimes saw Kate at Carla's games. After each game, Carla would find me in the crowd of parents and hug me. She completely ignored her mother. Kate called me weekly, demanding to know what was going on. After several calls, I decided not to answer and deleted all the messages without listening to them. At the end of the school year, I attended the graduation banquet. Carla received 3 awards. She was awarded for chemistry as the top student and for drama. No one was surprised when she was named the recipient of the Galasco Award for being the best athlete in the graduating class. Carla was allowed to give a short 3-minute speech as the recipient of the Galasco Award. Carla not only thanked her family, coaches, and teammates, but also provided many specific examples of how each of them contributed to her success on the court and field. The honesty of her remarks touched everyone in the room. I noticed several raised eyebrows, especially among the school staff, when Carla didn't mention the contribution of the school superintendent, her mother. The high school graduation ceremony took place on Thursday evening, a week after the senior banquet. We had 532 graduates. Due to the size of the class, the diploma ceremony was held each year in the main sports hall of the local college. I sat in the stands with Kayla and Kara. I didn't see my parents, but I knew they were nearby. On the opposite stands, I noticed the grandparents and aunts of the girls. I couldn't contain my joy when the auditorium erupted in applause upon hearing the Master of Ceremonies announce Carla Lillian Harrington. I grinned widely as I watched my daughter proudly and confidently cross the threshold of the graduation hall. I was curious to see how Carla would handle this moment, but I decided that I was confident enough in my younger daughter to know that she wouldn't embarrass herself. You see, the school superintendent, her mother, was the first person Carla would encounter in line to receive her diploma. Kate proudly held Carla's diploma, waiting for her daughter to approach and shake her hand. Everyone present was bewildered when Carla stopped 20 feet away from her mother. At the moment Kate began to lose her radiant smile, Carla raised both fists in front of her, palms facing the ceiling. For a moment, she paused, then slowly extended each middle finger. Thousands in attendance collectively sighed, and then a dead silence ensued. I suppose Carla's shout of "Fuck you, Mom" could be heard half a mile away. Carla pivoted on her heels and walked back toward the stage exit. As she passed the line of students waiting to go on stage, some of them raised their hands and greeted Carla. Carla returned to her seat as the noise of the crowd intensified. She sat, crossing her legs as a lady would, and folding her hands on her knees. No one could miss her radiant smile from ear to ear. The teacher announcing each graduate's name was an old-timer who had seen it all. It took the teacher just a few seconds to call the next student, David Michael Haverall, and the diploma ceremony continued. My family has been living in the city for over 20 years. Thanks to my business connections, the position of my former superintendent, and the reputation of all three daughters, we were well known. I suspect that many were puzzled by the Harrington family's reaction to Carla's outburst. I remained calm, but my brain was racing. I quickly decided that the fireworks were far from over and tried to determine what Carla might do next. Kayla and Kara were sitting to my right, giggling and clapping like fools. Fortunately, the diploma ceremony ended without further disruptions. After the ceremony, the girls and I went to the high school hallway to find Carla. As we huddled together, I noticed that two sets of grandmothers and grandfathers and the girls' aunts were also standing together, but for some reason didn't approach us. We had to wait only a few minutes before we saw Carla running across the vestibule. She rushed to me, hugged me around the neck, and said, "Oh, I forgot my diploma." She was busy hugging her sisters when Jim Miller, the school principal, approached me. Jim looked at me and said, "Carla is already a graduate, so I have no authority to punish her for her behavior. However, I do deserve an explanation from Carla. I agree and will insist that she come to your office next week," I told him, quickly adding, "Can I give you some advice?" My request caught Jim off guard, so I continued, "I didn't know Carla was going to disrupt the ceremony, but I do know why she did it. What we witnessed is the first act of a two-act play, I suppose. My advice, stand over there." I pointed to the corner of the hall, about 20 feet away from us. I concluded, "I don't think you want to find yourself in the middle of Act 2. I glanced over Jim's shoulder and saw Kate. She noticed our group and quickly, as her 10-centimeter heels would allow, made her way towards us. I leaned in and whispered, "Kate will be here in about 15 seconds. This will be awful." Jim glanced over his shoulder and saw the same expression on Kate's face as I did. He nodded abruptly at me and retreated to the corner. I wondered if Kate noticed that the closer she got to our group, the quieter the hall became. I quickly glanced at Carla. I didn't know what she had up her sleeve, but I could tell she was ready. As Kate passed by the group of grandmothers, grandfathers, and aunts, they aligned themselves with her. Kate stopped within arm's reach of Carla and demanded, "What on earth was that?" Carla's deliberate smirk turned her mother's face crimson. "I'll answer your question if you allow me to ask mine first," Carla said. It seemed like everyone in the hall was trying to inch closer to hear what was being said. Kate was too angry to respond, so Carla asked much louder than necessary, "Who is my biological father?" Dead silence fell over the hall as Kate's face contorted. She gasped, "What?" Kara jumped up and repeated, "My sister wants to know the name of her biological father." Kate pointed at me and almost shouted, Your biological father is over there." I shook my head and said, "No, that's not true." Kate's mouth dropped open, and before she could make another sound, Kayla announced to Carla, "The month you were conceived, she had so many men between her legs that she doesn't even know your father's name." Kate swung her open hand towards her eldest daughter. I saw her approaching but couldn't do anything to stop her. Out of nowhere, Carla's maternal grandfather reached out and grabbed Kate's wrist. "You'll never strike my granddaughter," commanded George. George approached me and asked, "You're not Carla's biological father?" I shook my head and told him, "No." "How long have you known this?" he inquired. "Not long," I replied. He stepped back slightly and sat down, looking Carla in the eyes. It took George a moment to gather his thoughts before he said, "If things hadn't happened the way they did, I wouldn't have 3 perfect granddaughters. You and your sisters are perfect in many ways because of the man who has his hand on your shoulder, your dad." Tears streamed down George's cheek as he continued, "Your grandmother and I, and your grandpa, we wish you hadn't suffered like this. But know that we love you and are incredibly proud of the young woman you've become." George leaned in and kissed Carla on the cheek. He kissed Kayla and Kara too. Turning to me, he hugged me and whispered sadly, "I don't know what I did wrong to deserve 3 bitches for daughters." He kissed me on the cheek and then turned to my father. George stood tall, straightening his shoulders. Looking at my father, he said, "I'm sorry my family has caused yours so much pain and heartache. I will forever be ashamed." George took his wife Anne's hand and slowly led her towards the exit. The crowd parted to let the elderly couple through. I felt immensely proud of Carla as she joined hands with her sisters and called out, "Wait, Grandma and Grandpa, you promised me a celebratory dinner." As they passed by my relatives, Kayla said, "You'd better believe you're coming too." She grabbed my mom's hand and practically dragged her along. Dad shot me a quick glance. I smiled, winked, and said, "Enjoy." Kate, her older sisters Mickey and Jen, and I watched as both grandfathers, grandmother, and 3 granddaughters made their way to the exit from the hall. Kate turned to me and asked, "Can we have a moment to talk privately?" Her eyes were watery, and she was on the verge of tears. I pondered Kate's request for half a second before shaking my head. "No, thank you, Kate. There's nothing I need to say to you." As I turned and began to navigate through the crowd of onlookers, Kate cried out, "Please, Chris, we need to fix this." At 52, I was semi-retired. The rental property industry was saturated with wannabes and weekend warriors convinced that anyone could flip a house for profit. I made some additional changes to the direction of my business. I helped create a real estate fund that invested in old, outdated shopping centers. Our group bought old properties, often with significant tax incentives from the city and state. We renovated and updated the real estate and leased it out. I found that I could find new projects and oversee renovations using just a laptop and mobile phone, allowing me to work from anywhere in the world. Last summer, I bought a small house on wheels and headed to Tennessee. I spent 5 weeks, working a few hours every morning and taking walks in the Blue Ridge Mountains every afternoon. I shed nearly 30 pounds, covering almost 300 miles in the process. I ate fish caught in nearby rivers and streams and led a relatively simple life. The following spring, on a Wednesday afternoon, I felt restless. Sitting in my home office, I was bored. Without thinking about the potential consequences, I left the office, went into my shed, and hitched my Jeep Wrangler to the back of the mobile home. Packing a few days' worth of clothes, I headed west, embarking on a 2-hour journey to my daughter Kylie's house. I arrived in a small town in Westchester County, New York, where Kyle and her family had settled. I pulled the camper onto the driveway and unhitched the Jeep. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I had hooked up water and electricity and was sitting in a camping chair on the driveway, enjoying a book. It wasn't long before, just 2 houses down from my daughter's, the school bus stopped. 5 little children got off the bus, and I watched, recognizing my grandson. He shouted, "Grandpa, it's me, Bryce." I shouted back, "Bryce, it's me, Grandpa." Bryce ran across 2 lawns and fell into my outstretched arms. We talked for a few minutes, after which I asked the 6-year-old, "Do you want to play catch?" He agreed, dashed into the garage, used the remote keypad to open the door, and retrieved his baseball glove. We had just settled on the lawn in front of the house and made a few throws when a local police car pulled up to the curb in front of the house. A few seconds later, a second police car approached from the opposite direction. 2 officers got out of the first car and a third from the second patrol car. Though I was concerned, I was confident that someone had called the police to investigate the case of a strange adult playing with Bryce. I sat down next to Bryce, pointed to the lone officer, and said loudly enough for all the officers to hear, "Bryce, I want you to go up to that officer and say, 'Hi,
I'm Bryce.
how can I help you?'" I pointed to the other 2 officers and said, "I'll go up to these police officers and say, 'Hi, I'm Bryce's grandpa. How can I help you?'" Police officers visibly relaxed as I playfully swatted Bryce on the rear, and he trotted over to the policeman. I didn't hear what Bryce said, but I responded in kind when he gave me a thumbs up. Approaching the other 2 officers, one was a mature woman with sergeant stripes on her uniform. The other officer looked too young to be a police officer. Introducing myself to them, the young officer said, "Your grandson's after-school sitter is a neighbor. She called us when she saw Bryce playing with you. Apparently, she's never met you and was very concerned when he didn't go to her house." As the officer finished, Bryce and the third policeman joined our group. I asked Bryce, "Where do you usually go when you get off the school bus?" Bryce pointed down the street. There, on the steps, stood an elderly woman looking our way. Bryce said, "I go to Mrs. Walsh's house. She takes care of me until Mom gets home." At that moment, Kyle's SUV screeched to a halt in front of her driveway. She leaped out of the car. She looked distressed, but relief spread across her face. Kyle told us, "When Grandpa Harrington comes to town, everything always livens up." After Kyle's arrival, things cleared up fairly quickly. As she spoke with the young police officers, the sergeant asked me, "How do you like your motorhome?" I replied, "I've had it for just a year. Last summer, I explored the Blue Ridge Mountains in Tennessee, and I really enjoyed the break. This summer, I'm planning to head west and hike the Rockies for about a month or so." The sergeant confessed, "In 2 months, I'm retiring, and I'm already thinking about disappearing for a year, exploring all the places I've wanted to see." The day was scorching.